Good evening, members and officers of the Council. I don't think we've got any members of the public, but there may be people watching. Welcome to this meeting of the Governance and Audit Committee. We've got a couple of new members this evening, so welcome. If the fire alarm is activated, please vacate the offices via the stairs. Do not use the lifts. Assemble in Hawley Square on the green. Officers will assist you and advise when it is deemed safe to return to the chamber. Does anyone intend to film the meeting? No, there are no members of the public, so we will not go through that part of it. But if anybody does wish to film proceedings, please avoid filming any members of the public that do turn up, particularly if there are children present. Can everyone please ensure their mobile phones are turned to silent and they're not used to make or receive phone calls in the chamber while the meeting is in progress. And please note that the meeting is being live streamed for members of the public. It will also be recorded and will be subsequently broadcast on the Council's YouTube channel. I don't think we've got any councillors speaking under 20.1. And we've got apologies. Charles, do you want to go through them?
Yes, Chair. We've got apologies from Councillor Faruqi, who is being substituted by Councillor Crittenden. And we've got an apology from Councillor Pope, who's being substituted by Councillor Driver. And we also got another apology from Councillor Barlow.
And I think we also had an email. Also had an email come in from Councillor Scott as well.
There is Councillor Scott's apologies as well. Sorry.
Any other apologies? Nope. Okay. Any declarations of interest? Agenda item 2. No. Okay. We will move on to agenda item 3. So this is in slightly different to normal because the last meeting of the Governance and Audit Committee was not quorate. So our first action is we've got to go through the minutes of the last meeting and make sure we approve them. You will all be glad to hear that we've decided to take a vote on them in total at the end. So we're not going to have to vote and go through every agenda item again. So I'm going to go through them. If people have got a copy and if anybody wants to make any comments, please do so as we go. We have the Treasury Management and Annual Investment Strategy, which was down for noting. We have the quarterly internal audit report, which was received by members and there were not any suggested changes. We have the corporate risk report, which was, just let me skip to the end, was approved by the last meeting. And we had the annual governance statement, which again, I believe was agreed, that we were noting and then approving it. And then finally, I think we had the external audit findings report, the draft audit timetable, and I believe that was it, and they were down for noting. Any comments? Yes, Councillor Garner.
Of minimal significance to any of that, but the apologies for absent hasn't included my name, and I had to give them my apologies.
And I can confirm that happened. We'll make sure that's added onto the record, but okay, if that is yeah.
There was one item on the audit findings report that one of the recommendations was that delegation was given to Chris, so that requires approval rather than noting.
Which page was that one on the notes? Oh yes, so we got, is this in the unlikely event that a minor change would be required, the section 151 be delegated the authority to sign off the audit findings. Okay. If there are no concerns from that, can I have a proposal and a seconder that we adopt these? Councillor Packman proposed, Councillor Britcher seconded. Are members agreed? Okay, we will move on. Right, agenda item 4, we have the quarterly internal audit update and we have Simon here. Can you please introduce your report, Simon?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. This is our regular quarterly internal audit update report. Slightly smaller report to usual because, of course, it's only a month since the last meeting of the committee. The report summarises the work of the East Kent Audit Partnership on your behalf since the last meeting, together with details of the performance of the East Kent Audit Partnership itself to the 30th of September. If I could direct your attention to the table on page 21 of the agenda pack, that summarises the 2 new audits completed during this period. One of those, Member Code of Conduct and Standards Arrangements, we concluded substantial assurance. For members of this committee that are new to, for members that are new to this committee, we conclude one of 4 assurance levels: no assurance, limited, reasonable or substantial. Worth saying, no assurance is ever absolute. There is always room for risk and control failure. The definitions of those assurance levels are included. They are on page 30, and for the assurance levels we use the SIPFA recommended definitions. We make a number of recommendations as part of each audit, and we categorise them critical, high, medium or low in terms of priority, and again the definitions of those priorities are on page 30. The other audit that we undertook during this period was events management. We did conclude limited assurance in that area, but I'm very confident that by the time we do the follow-up, which should be in Q4, that will be up to at least reasonable. I believe that Penny's team have already implemented the vast majority of the recommendations, so we'll look to bring the follow-up in respect of that audit to the next meeting of this committee, which I think is the 5th of March. Follow-up is an important part of internal audit work. Typically, about 3 months after each audit has been completed, we go back and do a follow-up. We don't take management's word for it that they've implemented the recommendations. We go back and check, and we will test the critical and high recommendations to make sure they are fully implemented and are working. During the period under review, we only undertook one follow-up, because of course we're only talking about the last month. That was coastal management, which was substantial assurance both before and after follow-up. Very, very rare for us to put an assurance level down at follow-up. I suppose it does happen very occasionally, but fortunately not very often. Appendices to this report are the ones that members of this committee will become familiar with. On page 27, probably the most important of the appendices, is progress against the agreed internal audit plan. The plan was agreed back in March, and this shows progress up to the 30th of September, the halfway mark. As at that point we had completed 55% of the plan, so fraction ahead of target. I can update that as at 30th of November we were up to 74%, so yeah, quite well advanced with the plan. We will ease off slightly in Q4 and probably catch up at a couple of the other sites that we cover. But yet we aim to do about 95% to 98% for each of the 4 partners. Also within that appendix you have details of the East Kent Services audit plan. That covers things such as benefits, council tax, customer services, etc. Last but not least, on page 33 we have a balanced scorecard of key performance indicators for the East Kent Audit Partnership itself. We split it into 4 perspectives. A financial perspective that tells you how much we charge you. I think we are very competitive. I would say that. In terms of internal audit, in terms of internal processes, of course, I've already mentioned probably the key KPI in that area, and that is the percentage of your plan that we've delivered, and that was 55% at 30th of June, which is the figure on this balanced scorecard. The innovation and learning shows the percentage of the team that are qualified. Christine can't be with us this evening. She has Folkestone's Audit Committee. But Christine, Christopher, who is my counterpart, and I are all qualified internal auditors. And we have good qualifications below that within the pool of auditors. We also do customer satisfaction questionnaires. And at the end of each audit, once the audit report has been finalised, we do ask the client what they think. Was the audit useful? Was the audit conducted in a reasonable manner? Probably like a few more questionnaires back than we get, but generally, well, actually, the feedback is 100% at the moment from all questionnaires that were completed. That concludes the presentation, Chair. Obviously, as usual, happy to take any questions that members may have.
Thank you very much, Simon. Any questions from members? No. Okay. This report is we're receiving this, and I don't think there are, as a second recommendation, any changes under 5.0 of Annex 1. So we will move on to the next agenda item. Okay, we've got agenda item 5, corporate risk management quarterly update. Amy, can we have your report, please?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. Tonight I would like to present the corporate risk report. As I'm sure you all know, our authority monitors and manages its corporate risk through the corporate risk register. The contents of the report highlight the high priority corporate risks and show the arrangements that are put into place to ensure these risks are monitored and managed appropriately. The Council is dedicated to a proactive approach on risk management and asks that all departments cooperate on the risk strategy. So our strategy defines corporate risks as those which could impact across the whole Council. Operational risks are identified from the bottom up through service planning and continuous review during the year. Operational risks may be escalated and considered corporate level dependent on the evaluation of the risk and through engagement with senior management and corporate management teams. This also runs alongside risk management training, which is offered and delivered to all service areas. This can be on an individual basis or a team meeting basis. This is really so that we can keep our risk management strategy relevant and current for all of the service areas. As we have such a diverse portfolio, it is incredibly important that we give this committee the full oversight of the risks that we all face. On that theme, we also understand that keeping things relevant and current is of utmost importance. As alluded to in last month's meeting, we are investing in creating a digital risk management platform. This is to centralise our risk registers, records, and to stream and develop risk management strategies. This is alongside actually reviewing the risk management strategy, including the risk objectives and the risk scoring matrix. This is with a view that a 5x5 matrix may be adopted and target risks to be introduced into the risk registers. This we feel would serve better to illuminate members on the management and on risk management and also our commitment to the risk management strategy. So this report represents a position at the beginning of October 2024 and is such, as you're all aware, is a snapshot of where the risk was at that point in time and where the mitigation sat as well. So please bear in mind that some of this might have moved on since then. Risks have been assessed in respect to the combination of the likelihood of something happening and the impact arising should they do so. At staff level, the corporate risk register is regularly covered by the corporate management team and of course the Governance and Audit Committee, which considers changes to the corporate risk register, and a view can also be taken regarding to the extent which risks should be tolerated. So as members would probably note from the report, all but one of the corporate risks stay static. The cyber attack on page 39 has been downgraded to a 12. This was given the significant focus and activity which had taken place to increase the controls and the mitigation since the last quarterly update. Consideration is now being given to reduce the likelihood score from 4, which was very likely, to 3, which is likely. However, this would in no way diminish the focus and work on cybersecurity, which would have to be sustained in order to continue to protect the organisation. But this does reflect the improved position the Council is in as a result of the significant amount of work that has been completed in recent months. From a risk management perspective, the impact would be very difficult to reduce, but closing gaps and tightening measures and controls will impact on the likelihood score if consistent and constantly monitored and adapted to reflect the organisational landscape. However, we do have Hannah and Dan on hand here tonight who will be able to answer any questions on the cyber risk. But for now, that does complete the corporate risk report update to members. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much. Do any members have any questions? Yes, Councillor Garner.
Thank you for that. I always enjoy listening to the risk report. Thank you very much. I just had a question I'd like to ask about the second last one, which is the EA inspection for groundwater risk assessments. And that relates to risk assessments that now need to be carried out on existing burial grounds, which, having in a previous life worked many years ago as a grave digger, I can understand why that would be an important thing to be done. But I don't fully understand what exactly the risk is. Is the risk that this hasn't been done, so that we are likely to have a EA inspection, or is it to do with what might happen if there is, flooding in a burial ground? Because I have seen that we have booked an assessment now for early next year. So within a month or two, does that mean within a month or two this won't be a risk at all anymore?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Mike's here tonight, but Penny is, so Penny can answer. Thank you.
That's okay. I was trying to get your attention. So it's a combination of both. At the moment, the risk is that if the Environment Agency inspected us, we would fail the inspection. But there is also a risk that we don't know what is the condition of the ground. So it could be that the outcome of the assessments is that we can no longer use part of our land as a burial ground or a scattering ground, depending on which part it is. So that there are kind of two risks. So at the moment, it's both of those risks combined. As of beginning of next year, once we've got the report, we'll then see which one it is that we need to move forward on. Hopefully, neither. It'll all be okay.
Any other comments here? Councillor Davis?
One other quick question, and thanks for that, because I did have a question on that, so Mike hit it nail on the head. I might be having a senior moment, but I wonder why Manston Airport is down as a risk to the council. I can see from the report that it says there may be an implication in terms of environmental protection officers being employed, but I wouldn't see that as a massive risk to the council, as it were. So I just wondered why a private matter is on our risk register when the whole thing has been repeatedly promoted as no cost to us.
So the risk to us is around not being able to provide the Port Health Authority service should they get up and running and import goods. We legally have to provide that service. The current market for environmental health officers is very competitive. We have Dover and Ashford as Port Health authorities. They pretty much, to cover off all the Brexit side, took everything off the market. We have had this before at the airport where we had to get up and running pretty much over a 3-week period over Christmas, back in 2013, I think it was. And the cost to authority, once it's up and running, it pays for itself, but the initial cost and the issues for us getting people in is quite difficult, and that's the risk.
So effectively, it's a statutory risk to us, we're saying, because if we can't recruit those people, we can't fulfil our obligations. Proper prior preparation and planning is a nightmare on this one, I'm sure, so, because who knows what time frame we're looking at. But thank you anyway, and thank you for the explanation. Thanks, Ben.
Any other comments? No, I've got a couple. First of all, wanted to say, glad to hear around the 5x5 risk score. I think that's the right move, and if members who have been on the committee for a while, that's been a bugbear of mine for a while. And also to thank Amy for picking up the risk around underinsurance of assets, which you reported to the last meeting, which I think is a really good risk to add on, because it's something that obviously the council can't do a lot about, because a lot of the transferring of that risk is either very expensive or we're just not able to get insurance. But I think it's good to have it in people's minds and have that on the risk register in a way. There was a point I wanted to make around the cyber risk score. So I think you can't have a conversation around cybersecurity in Thanet District Council without charting the journey we've gone through in 12 months, from 12 months ago effectively failing an audit in our cybersecurity procedures and then having what could have turned out to be quite a major cyber breach, but because of good response from officers and a lot of hard work, turned out to be minimised greatly, and a lot of great work has gone on. I know there's a cabinet advisory group later in December where hopefully there'll be some more updates since the last meeting in September about all the good work that's been taking place. But for me, looking at this from a pure risk management perspective, it's the one risk that I think has the ability to not just stop the council from doing day-to-day things, but actually stop delivering services. I don't think there's another risk that has the potential to do that. I mean, if you go through the risks that are elsewhere on the risk register, there's things that can cause us financial damage, there's things that can cause us reputational damage, but the ability of something immediately to stop services to residents and mean that we could impact other organisations by not collecting council tax, by not potentially engaging with providers of benefits, I think it really does worry me. And even with all the work that's been done, I don't think there's any organisation that can effectively mitigate cybersecurity in today's world. So this isn't a comment around Thanet District Council and the risk itself, but I think on a 4x4 risk matrix, I don't think we should be downgrading that in any way, and I feel quite strongly about that. I'll give the opportunity to the officers to respond on that, and then we can go from there.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. So just to follow up on that, I think I would really welcome the opportunity to discuss this in more detail at the Cybersecurity CAG. I think that's the exact kind of place for it, and I also respect that the role of GNA tonight is to challenge and to check what officers are bringing forwards for you. From our perspective, I think if there was a way of scoring the impact more highly than we could, then it would be off the chart, because I think we completely acknowledge the fact that the potential threat of what cyber attack could do to this organisation, as you say, could be catastrophic. So there's no inclination from us to in any way reduce that. I don't think we would ever be in a position to say that would be possible. I think from our perspective, what we've done in our assessments, which we've involved Amy, and Amy may well want to come in to give her view from a risk management point of view. The reason for reducing the score around the likelihood is that we're still absolutely saying there is every possibility this is going to happen. It is likely, in fact. The reason that we have reduced the score is due to the level of mitigations, the remedial actions, and the landscape change over the course of the last 12 months is so significant that in our mind, it would not be fair to the risk management process if we kept it at the same level. We don't think that would be presenting the organisation in a fair or accurate way. And moreover, I mean, I could go into, and I'm sure Dan will jump in a moment to go into some of those specific activities, but the governance arrangements, the budget, the resource, the expertise that we've now got, the monitoring, the awareness raising, the training programme, the separation, disaggregation of our network and our domain from the other partners, we are in an entirely different landscape, which is why that we felt that we could reduce it by one score. And actually, we also believe that we're confident in that because we've had the external accreditation of PSN compliance that we haven't had since 2018. Now, for the organisation to be given that status acknowledges the fact that they see that the risks and the processes that we've gone through have improved the council's position. So I would really argue strongly for kind of maintaining that, but I also completely respect that, and I do wonder whether we do need to have a bit more of a kind of a deep dive into that at the next cybersecurity CAG. But I don't know, Dan, if you wanted to just talk about some of the more specifics.
No, thank you. So as Hannah was saying, when we was going through the report and just kind of evaluating the risk, what we took into consideration was just kind of like where we are now with the infrastructure and the landscape, but also looking at the technical controls we put in place as well. So where we have now got the 24/7 threat hunting, so where that kind of monitors all our traffic coming in and out of the network, all our devices as well. So we are being alerted, but not just being alerted, but actually they are containing anything that is suspicious. And then obviously back in the summer as well, we had our IT health check, which we did have, I think it was 7 highs off the top of my head. And actually now, in the report, we did say we had 1 left, but actually we've now remediated that as well, which has now enabled us to actually get our PSN compliance about 2-3 weeks ago now. So, yeah, we just wanted to kind of, we've put all the information in the report as well. And as Hannah was saying as well, we are now increasing the awareness across the authority as well with training, so at staff briefings. We're pushing out more staff awareness surveys as well to kind of get a benchmark of where we are across the authority. With then that will enable us to do more kind of specific training as well for all officers to ensure that we are targeting the right kind of subject areas, just so we can then keep preventing ourselves from any kind of mistakes. And then just one other thing as well, it's been mentioned before, but a platform called KnowBe4 that we've put in place. So that is going to be used for pushing out training and policies. But however, that is also monitoring our usage of phishing emails. So obviously that is one of the, kind of a real big iris for all organisations. So that is also monitoring that for us, and we are now getting good data coming through where officers are reporting them and that they are actually being captured in time. And just one last thing as well, obviously you've probably seen in the news this week as well about a DDoS attack on council websites. So again, we've been a bit proactive as well, just making sure we're talking to our suppliers who kind of host our websites for us. We're just making sure we've got the right controls in place. I think it's just all them technical controls that we're just kind of highlighting in the report and just wanted to share this evening as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And just on the likelihood as well, you can all see on page 35 of your document pack how we score likelihood, and that's the consideration that we've used. Actually, is it going to be a more than 85% chance of occurrence? And that's where I know Hannah and Dan have placed that. That's the real scoring mechanism we use at base level. That's what we use across the board to have consistency on these risk scores. So appreciate everything that the Chair's saying, but I just wanted to point out how that risk would have got to. Thank you.
Thank you for the comments, and you know, it's a difficult one. There's 2 points I'd come across on here. Is firstly, the good work that's been done has not been embedded yet. There are 2 parts to cybersecurity. There's making the changes, the policies, and bringing in the correct thing, and it's embedding it in the culture. Cybersecurity, the big weakness is people, and there is no way you can embed a culture in that in 6, 9 months, probably even 2 years. It takes time, and it takes building through new joiners coming and trying to change people that have been here for a long time and stop having their old habits. It's going to take time. So that idea that likelihood has come down so quickly, I don't accept, and I don't think that's right. I think what we're talking about here is if you had this on a 5x5 matrix, you might be taking it down from a 25 to a 20, a likelihood of a 5 to a 4, but on a 4x4, I don't think you can do that. And the second point for me is that I've watched this trend in organisations. You know, cards on the table, as you know, I work in this industry. I work with a lot of different organisations, and there goes a spike in activity here. Incident happens, management jump on it, everybody gets terrified, policies change, then enthusiasm goes off, priorities change elsewhere, and then it becomes less of an issue again. I'm not saying that will happen here, but I think the corporate risk register almost giving a pat on the back on saying, yep, all that investment we've done has brought the likelihood down, sends the wrong message to the organisation. Because if leadership in this council is under any illusions that cyber risk has been mitigated because of the work that's happening internally on the council, and the likelihood is being reduced, those illusions need to be shattered. Because all the work that we're doing, the technology is moving forwards. I mean, some of the stuff that's now being used around generative AI and people using deep fake videos to get personal information from people, it is going at a different level of knots. So, you know, I don't want to in any way have my comments going against all the good work that's been taking place, but it has to be seen within the context of what's happening around this risk. And I don't think it's reasonable for any organisation, a council, a bank, a manufacturing business, at the moment to be thinking that you can reduce likelihood or impact around cyber. In fact, I think it's going up. Councillor Davies, you had a comment, and then I'll come to you, Councillor Crittenden.
Thanks, Chair. I think you've raised a couple of really excellent points there, and I just wanted to clarify something, because in terms of auditing and the risk factors relationship, if you like, in the audit, I think there's something really important here, because effectively, and the nature of cyber risk is it's always 100%, as you say, and as Hannah's report said, it's happened, it's going to happen, it's going to happen, it's going to happen. That's the nature of that thing. And on that basis, it's probably only fair to ever have the thing at maximum risk at all times. But does that become a meaningless measure effectively? And is that fair on that department? Because are we looking at this as a purely informative measure in terms of that indicates a risk, we have to react? Or is it being used also to monitor performance and things, in which case I think we perhaps have to look at how that measure's applied. And as I say, I'm known for being robust, but I'm also known for being fair, and I don't think it's necessarily, if in any way other than assessing the immediate risk, this has any bearing on those departments, I'd like to see them recognised in some other way, because what they're doing is phenomenal, but it's all yesterday's chip wrapper basically in IT, isn't it? So And I just wanted to put that on the record and say that I think there's space perhaps for it to have its own form of audit even, because as you've said and identified correctly, growth area as well. So maybe it's something that for future consideration needs to be appraised on a different basis in order to be fair on those doing what is pretty tedious work. So
Yeah, thank you, Councillor.
never boring, but tedious.
Yeah. Chris, do you want to come on that point, or can I bring Councillor Crittenden? Councillor Crittenden.
Yeah, I wanted largely to agree with what you were saying, Councillor Scobie. I'm on the cybersecurity CAG as one of the non-experts to ask the idiot questions. And I'm looking at this and there's something about a fishhook icon, which I'm thinking, is that something I should know exists in the report? Because I actually haven't got a clue. But I do think it should be 16, or I do think it should still be very, very high, because I just remember back in the previous council, and I'm going to use this as a comparison, as you've just said, it's changing all the time. IT is changing and there are new dangers, new risks coming in all the time. And in the previous council, there was a risk that was permanently high because we were very close to equal. There was no overall control on the council. And that kept us, doesn't matter how well we worked together or what it was, that kept us at a really high level. And I just think, and that's just something because it existed. It wasn't because it was good or bad or anything else. It just existed. And I think that the ever-changing landscape of IT and all of the stuff that I don't understand just exists. And so I just don't know how that can be taken down as a risk. And that's my thinking about it. So thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I don't want to try and just summarise too bluntly what Hannah and Dan have probably articulated far more precisely and accurately than I could. Firstly, completely agree where we are in the 5x5. I know the conversations we've had before, it's taken some time. The reason for the delay in moving to that is aimed at a lot of great work around embedding a new risk management strategy and culture at the authority, and we didn't want to change too much at one time. But the next step is to move to that 5x5 matrix. And I agree, I think with the 5x5, it gives us more room for nuance, particularly with complex risks like cyber risk here, to get that delineation between the top scoring risks and risks that are just a little bit, just bubbling under a little bit. My sort of personal read on this is completely recognise the comments of the committee in terms of the severity, the impact of this risk. It is one of the risks that can completely cripple an authority and can take a long time to respond to it. So the impact is always going to be right at the top that we can ever score. I also think with likelihood, we're not, we've lowered it slightly, but what we're not doing is being ignorant to think the risk of attack is less likely. I think, Hannah and Dan, they presented to management team earlier this month, or perhaps the back in the last month. I think there was 1 month over last quarter, can't remember the particular month, there was an attempt on average one a day during that period. So we know that it's highly likely that we are going to be subject to a cyber attack. What we are saying is, because the controls that we've now got in place reduces the likelihood of one of those attacks being successful. So we think because of the strength and controls that we've got in place reduces that risk of us being that top risk happening where we are absolutely nobbled by an attacker. I think there's other risks there. If you were going to say, are we going to be attacked every day? Yes, we do, and we need to recognise that. I think we are recognising that, but I think it's fair to say the progress, the resources that have been put in place help us address those in a much better way, much more proactive and strong way than we were when the audit was brought forward a year ago. But by no means are we as a management team and the IT team saying that, well done, we've done this, it's job done. We're completely aware that things, as you say, are moving at that pace, that we've got to just try and keep up with them, because they're always one step ahead of us in terms of those attacks being developed, and it is moving at such a pace that we need to be really, really vigilant to the risk. But at the moment, it feels like the risk is being reduced in recognition of the good work that's been done by the team, but probably just echoing the points Hannah said, the CAG is the perfect place to have those conversations. And just because a risk comes down doesn't mean that we can't put it back up in future if we think actually through further debate around a risk, actually the scoring should be adjusted accordingly.
I accept all of that. I think making this a comparison of where we've come from in a year is not effective risk management in my view, because you're not looking at it in the round, and we've got to look at it in the context that we may have improved our capabilities to detect, we may have improved our capabilities to respond, and our systems may be more robust and able to recover. That does not mean that the context that we're operating in has changed. In fact, I think it's getting worse. And I think a couple of statistics, which is the UK is the second highest target of cyber attacks, and a lot of the companies that TDC will rely on will be targeted, mainly professional services firms. And I think this is one of the parts that's being missed here, which is we're only just starting our journey here. I talked about the cultural change we've got to go through in terms of getting staff to engage with this and officers, and for this to be embedded. There is a whole supply chain piece. And I work with a lot of organisations that have mapped their supply chains, have absolute requirements for any new suppliers to go through cyber certifications, to have ISOs in place, to be doing all sorts of stuff. I've sat in meetings in the last 6 months where we've approved contracts, and I think we have put suppliers through cyber questionnaires, but to suggest that we are doing that sort of level of detail, I just don't think it's fair. I don't want to sort of elongate this meeting, and Councillor Crittenden, sorry, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a question that maybe isn't for answering here, but might be going towards the cyber CAG, and that is, at what level of risk would you feel is a comfortable number, and is that comfort a risk? And as it's gone down, and I think that's a question that I think we need to think about, particularly with cybersecurity.
I think for me, there are certain risks that you just can't mitigate. And, risk management there's effectively 4 T's of risk management: transfer, tolerate, terminate, and I'm forgetting one. But effectively here, we're going to have to tolerate this risk because we can't terminate cybersecurity. We can try and transfer some of it in terms of cybersecurity, but we're effectively going to have to tolerate the risk. So, in my view, cybersecurity is a top risk, and it will remain a top risk, and it's no reflection on the IT team for the organisation, because it's just a top risk. Councillor Davies, did you want to come in? Sorry.
Thanks again, Chair. So, and again, I think we've opened up a really interesting dialogue here, actually. There is a factor that ultimately any objective has to be measurable, and and time, that old part of the equation, I think is what you were discussing, saying about whether we measure against a year ago or where. So the question is, where do we measure? And I think the answer to that is perhaps we need several measures, because it is usually a very good bearing to do an annual review, which is why obviously the world revolves around them with accounting and that. However, the difficulty is it's a journey with no destination, and therefore, how do you assess where you are? Because an objective should meet the mnemonic PRAM: precise, realistic, agreed, and measurable. And the key part to that measurability is to establish a time frame. So but the only thing here we can do is impart a notional time frame, as for example Chris referenced, and to keep doing that effectively, because it is just a, I guess it's like, I was in compliance in financial services, and you can have everything buttoned down today, and tomorrow it's a whole fresh set of problems because someone thought of them. And that is the nature of cyber security again. So again, maybe, and I'm trying to think, and you might be able to help me here, is there any body or committee on the council that we could perhaps be positively helpful here and put a review group together on that assessment basis and see how we might be able to help move forward that review of not just risk assessment, but all accessibility, because if we know where we are when we're crossing the stream, then we'll always stand on the stepping stones instead of into the torrent. So just trying to think of a positive solution here that gives the outcome for this committee, but also that's fair to those doing, as I say, the work. Because what we've got is Niagara Falls, and every now and again we just got to check the quality and volume of water coming over it.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Davis. My sort of gut feeling is we approve the risk register this evening, maybe put a pause on the cyber rating and refer this to the cyber CAG to give some recommendations back to the next Governance and Audit Committee meeting, because there is a group that's set up of people that have got go into much more detail around the cyber security, and it may be a way for us to then get their views back. Okay, you are, thank you. For that group to provide some feedback to the concerns and comments that are raised, but I don't know, Chris. Yeah, I'll just let Chris come in and then we can come to.
Yeah, so in order, responding to Councillor Crittenden in terms of what's a comfortable score for risk management, I think we wouldn't want any of our risks to be in that 16, or 12 bracket. That's a high risk. But as I had to Google it as well, I couldn't remember the fourth T. It is, yeah, tolerate, which effectively means you just accept the risk, terminate it, you stop doing the activity, you're not going to do it, that gets rid of the risk. Treat it, you put controls in place, the like that Dan and Hannah referred to, or transfer it either to a third party or via insurance to deal with your risks there. I think that's what we want to do to get all those risks down. If you look at the corporate risk register, lots of those high risks are driven by external factors. They're things that aren't directly under our control, be it a cyber attack. Limited resources is largely directed or determined by central government policy and funding. Economic environment, Thanet District Council has a very limited ability to impact the macroeconomic environment. Homelessness, that's our one real demand-led service. The Environmental Act 2021, again, that's a piece of central government legislation. Those are really why you've got big scores there, because we haven't been able to apply those 4 Ts to get those risks down because they're outside of our sphere of control. Moving on to Councillor Davis' point, I agree the CAG's the right place to deal with the cyber incident, but when we bring forward the new risk management strategy, if the committee is agreeable, we could look at that point in time to form a subgroup of G&A or some form of working group that could do a detailed review of the strategy and then recommend up to the formal committee before we adopt it.
Thank you, and I think that would be a good move. And I've felt, I've discussed this with Amy before, I think it's very hard to do a deep dive on risk management, because behind all of these scores are, lots of detail and lots of mitigation. It's very hard to do that on a council meeting of 15, so I think that would be an excellent suggestion. Can I just ask relevant officers on this, do you want a formal recommendation from us around this score? Are you happy that if we request that this is added to the agenda of the December cyber CAG, that the concerns just from G&A and just questioning whether we should be reducing that score, where we can review that as cyber CAG? Are you happy just to take that on board? We don't need a formal recommendation.
Yeah, I'm really happy to do that, and everything that's been raised I completely agree with. I think from our point of view, it's really important to say this was not a mechanism to pat ourselves on the back at all. This was because fundamentally this organisation is in a completely different position than it was before. 12 months ago we didn't even manage cybersecurity. We had no resource. There was no dedicated person in this council that had management control over that, and it was never discussed at a senior management team level. It now is monthly. So I think from our perspective, if we hadn't have done all of those actions, then our risk score arguably should have increased. Now, the way that the risk management matrix works, you can't increase your score. All you can do then is put in your controls and your mitigations and then have a sensible debate about whether you can then decrease that. But I totally hear what you're saying. And I think it's really important that councillors know we're under no illusion. I think the threat externally is going up and up and up and up, and we absolutely hear that. It's just there's got to be a way, as Councillor Davis said, that the mechanism kind of acknowledges that activity activities going on, and the organisation is in a safer, secure position as a result of that. Now, what happens outside of that boundary is kind of outside of our control. But yeah, I think that's kind of where we were coming from. But yes, we're happy to take it to the CAG is the short answer.
Thank you. And again, this may be something we can pick up at a risk management subgroup, but there are different ways of scoring risks. We're looking at a 5x5 matrix. There are organisations that also add in velocity. There's also organisations that have a whole other set of metrics to show direction of travel and what controls need to be on. So, you know, we're looking for that level of detail. We can put that in if we're being constrained by the risk matrix. For me, I don't feel like that's the role of this committee to get into that day to day, but if we're having an issue where a particular risk is being scored in a way because we want to show direction of travel, but we're concerned as members that that's potentially sending the wrong message to management, to staff, to stakeholders, that we feel like we've got a risk under control, which in my view, no matter what we do, will be out of control, then yeah, I think it's sending the wrong message. Yeah, Chris, and then we'll move on. You'll be all relieved to hear.
Thank you, Chair. I can't take credit for this. As a point Simon actually prompted on me to make this fire chat or suggested. I think something that we need to do better in our reporting to the committee is recognise and reflect that lots of the risks you're seeing are after mitigation. So actually the inherent risk that we face from cybersecurity is off the chart. It's completely top scoring. The mitigations and controls that we've then got in place have reduced it somewhat, but it's still a top risk. I think going forward under the new risk management strategy, we want to bring that to the committee so you can see these are all our top risks before the mitigation. This is what happens. Then you've got the management action, whether it's treat, tolerate, terminate or transfer. This is then what the risk score, residual risk score is left with.
Yeah, of course, Councillor Davis.
I think one last point, the nearest analogy I can draw to it, it's a bit like a vaccine programme in that you can only look at the most likely risks and vaccinate against those. There is always going to be the alternative scenario, and that's the factor that I think we need to account for, because although Hannah said they're not there to pat themselves on the back, we are at times, and I'd like to pat them on the back, because from, as you yourself said, from where we were just under a year ago with a potential meltdown on our hands, to be as resilient as we are now, I think deserves real applause, and I'd like to record that. So.
Yeah, definitely. Are members happy that we approved the risk register this evening, but we're going to receive a report back from the Cyber CAG to our next meeting, just giving feedback on that cyber risk and whether it should be reduced in likelihood? Is everybody happy with that? Can I have a proposer and a seconder? Councillor Bitcher proposed, Councillor Crittenden seconded. Members agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, officers. Okay, moving on to agenda item 6, we have the mid-year review 24-25 Treasury Management Annual. This is over to you, Matt.
This should be a little bit quicker, to be fair. This report summarises Treasury management activity and prudential and Treasury indicators at the midpoint of 24-25. Part of the Treasury management operation is to ensure that cash flow is adequately planned, with surplus monies being invested in low-risk counterparties, providing adequate liquidity initially before considering optimising investment return. The second main function of the Treasury Management Service is the funding of the Council's capital plans. These capital plans provide a guide to the borrowing needs of the Council, essentially the longer-term cash flow planning to ensure the Council can meet its capital spending operations. This management of longer-term cash may involve arranging long or short-term loans or using longer-term cash flow surpluses, and on occasion any debt previously drawn may be restructured to meet the Council risk or cost objectives. Officers can confirm that the approved limits within the annual investment strategy were not breached during the first 6 months of 24-25. It's one of the things I've touched on previously, and I think it's then over to the recommendations in the report unless anyone's got any questions, Chair. Thank you.
Any questions from anybody? No. Okay, we are down to recommend this report for approval. Can I have a proposer and a seconder, please? Councillor Davis proposed, Councillor Donaldson seconded, and members agreed? Thank you very much. Okay, we're on to agenda item 7, which is the independent auditor's report on the audit of the financial statements for 22-23 draft audit opinion. Chris, I believe you're introducing the report.
I will, if that's okay, Chair, just before passing over to my colleague, Matt Dean, who's here, joins us. He's our key audit partner from Grant Thornton. First off, I just want to say I've got a bit of sort of context that I want to set out. None of the criticism I've got here is directed at Matt, professionally or his team. I've got utmost respect for the work they've done. I'm probably having a bit of a whinge of the general situation that we're in and the state of the audit market and environment and in general. I do also have a few things I'm going to just try and throw up on the screen. Apologies, didn't get these into the reports, but hopefully they'll help explain and provide a bit of context. If I can just get that up. Apologies for all those who are watching at home on the live stream who won't be able to see this. Okay, so Annex 1 to this report sets out Matt and his team's opinion on the accounts for the year ended 31st March 2023. First thing to point out, that's quite a while ago, and that's not where we want to be. 31st of March, we're getting on for almost 2 years. And it's questionable how much value there is. Matt will recognise this, him having to audit them and also presenting them to you as the committee when there's that amount of delay. The opinion that Matt has provided on the 22-23 accounts is a disclaimed opinion. Disclaimer has been issued. I'm not going to go into... I'll try not to steal Matt's thunder, and he'll probably explain this much better than I can. When auditors issue an opinion, they have a number of options open to them. What we always like to see is the top left one with the big thumbs up. That's the unqualified opinion, or it's often referred to like a clean opinion. That means nothing to see here. The accountants have done a great job, pat on the back. The other options they've got is a qualified opinion, which used to really confuse me because qualified sounded like a good thing, but actually it's not a great thing. What that means is the auditors saying it's okay apart from this. There's a few minor things in there that mean the accounts aren't completely true, fair and accurate. So your accounts are okay, they could be better. The next two ones are really not great. Adverse opinion means your accounts are rubbish, effectively. They're materially misstated and the errors through them are pervasive. They're everywhere, pretty much, to the extent that they could be subject to significant errors or fraud, and so you really can't rely on them at all. The last one is where we are here, disclaimer of opinion, which means the auditors are unable to express an opinion. And that is happening across local government at quite a rate at the moment, and that's because we're in a situation where there's a significant backlog in outstanding audits in terms of the amount that have been published and audited. So I've got another slide here, if it moves on. This is the position for 22-23 and 23-24. Apologies, it wasn't in the pack. I only got this latest one last week. You can see that for the 22-23 accounts that we're looking at the moment, almost half of them, well, more than half of them, are still at draft stage. So that's quite significant. 9 of those have been disclaimed, and they're all recent. Over the next 2 weeks, I would expect almost all of those that are at draft stage to be issued with a disclaimer. So we're going to see hundreds of local authority accounts for 22-23 with disclaimers, and you'll also see that you're looking at almost 2/3 of that of district councils are in that bracket. Hopefully 23-24 will be a bit better, so we've got a backstop date for 22-23 where the audits have to be done and completed by 13th of December. Done and completed means in a lot of the cases they'll be issuing a disclaimer to say we've given you an opinion but effectively we haven't been able to do the work. So, as I said, this isn't a criticism of Matt or any, the firms particularly. It's a situation that we are in. Again, so this sort of gives you a picture of how this has developed in recent years. So you go back to 1920, pre-pandemic, most of the accounts were getting signed off by time. Things have got progressively worse in recent years. So we're very much not alone in this. Legislation has been passed. This is why we've got these disclaimers, because this backlog, all those sort of yellowy amber ones, need to be sort of swept out the way, and we start again effectively with 24-25 and trying to get those in place. So, in terms of the disclaimer position, the text that Matt's provided in this letter, I think it's fair to say, is fairly standard across the sector. You're going to see this elsewhere, where GT have effectively said we've not been able to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence by the backstop date, which will be end of next week, to conclude the authority's financial statements for the year ended 33rd of March 2023 as a whole are free from material misstatement. We were also unable to obtain sufficient appropriate evidence for the corresponding figures for the same reason. We therefore issued a disclaimer of opinion on the financial statements. I'm not being critical of Matt. I think this is fairly standard wording that's been used across the sector. Personally, I think it's a little bit harsh in terms of what the narrative is saying around where local authorities are. I've spoken to a number of my counterparts who are facing similar sort of disclaimers and similar wording. Later on in the agenda, item 9, GT's audit findings report. Apologies, I'm skipping around a little bit here, Chair. Attached to that is an annex that sets out government guidance on how the disclaimer opinions should be viewed. And you can see from the guidance that the issuance of disclaimers will be commonplace. I've already shown that on a graph. And in most cases, largely outside of the authority's control. So this document further explains the context for these opinions to help ensure that local bodies are not unfairly judged. That's central government's words, not mine, but I'm just trying to offer a little bit of context in terms of where we are, why we are there. We've got a backstop for this year, which is 13th December, so it really needs to be done tonight, unless anything in terms of accepting the opinion and the audit opinion for 23, 24, 28th of February, so we've got a meeting rearranged to deal with that. We're hopeful that actually we'll be in a different position for 23, 24, and a disclaimer won't be issued because of the work that's been done. Matt and his team have worked closely with Matt and his team from Grant Thornton to reprioritise the workload to make sure there was always a risk that one of these years was going to be disclaimed unless we threw an inordinate and disproportionate amount of resources at it, which we can't really justify from a value for money perspective for the taxpayer. But I'm hopeful and confident that the 23-24 accounts, when we bring them back to you in February, that Matt will not be in a position when he has to offer a disclaimer position. But I'll pass over to Matt if that's okay, Chair, and through you, Chair, happy to take questions on after Matt's introduced this item.
Yeah, thank you, Tris. I guess kind of these three items almost sit together, really. 7, 8, and 9. Almost item 9 probably comes first. I think echo a lot of what Chris has said in terms of the position around disclaimer. Clearly, not where any of us want to be. I think the government guidance is helpful in terms of framing where it stands. So I think if you looked at it from a commercial perspective, a disclaimer opinion would effectively mean that company had gone bust, which clearly isn't the case we are in here. And I think that's something that all of us have got a role to play in getting out and explaining to those parties. It's a mechanism to clear the backlog, effectively. That's literally, the only way around it is doing it in the way that they've said in the guidance. So that's why we are where we are in terms of that opinion that's there. I think the only thing I will flag in terms of the opinion itself that I guess would be somewhat unique to the authority is the references on page 8 and 9 of the pack around the statutory recommendations that are issued in September 2023. Given this is the first opinion that's been issued since those were raised, we have to include those in that opinion. They're not new. The authority knows about those, but they have to go in the opinion. So those are the bits that I would say were probably the only unique bits in there compared to any other of the accounts that are going to be disclaimed. I think just to slightly temper Chris's enthusiasm around 23.4, I think, and it's in the government guidance, 23.4 will be a challenge as well, because ultimately the starting point will be those 22, 23 numbers which are disclaimed. So it will be a challenge for us to do enough work on that brought forward position to enable us to completely remove that disclaimer for 23-4. I think more realistic, it may well be 24-5. But equally, we will work with the authorities to do as much as we can to bring that back to a sensible time frame. MHCRG have been reasonably clear they don't want the disclaimers to run on any longer than they need to, but there is obviously challenges around, particularly with reserves and opening balances, how we can do enough work to get comfort that they aren't materially wrong if you've not been audited for 2 years. So I guess that's probably all I wanted to say in terms of that opinion item. I'll stop there and then go through the other items as we go.
Thank you very much. I want to start off with a comment, and this really isn't good enough, is it? And this isn't your fault, it's not council officers, but this isn't a good look for local government. And at a time when people have low trust in institutions and councils are under pressure financially, having a situation where we are confident our figures are materially correct, but we just can't get enough audit resources in place to audit them and get that tick is not great. And that, you know, I really think we need to understand from yourself, Matt, and from Grant Thornton and from officers what the council needs to do to make sure that we do not have this position for the 23-24 accounts. Is there something additional that we can do from our side? Because as I understand it, this is being prioritised and the work is being done. Is this a Grant Thornton resourcing issue? Is this a sign-off from elsewhere? Because I certainly feel like if we are going out of this process with 2 years of accounts with a question mark next to them, I think that's unacceptable. And I'd like to hear from you, Matt, on behalf of Grant Thornton, what the situation is and how we can make sure that that doesn't happen twice.
I think it's a real challenge, and I think this was probably the one of the challenges with drawing a cut-off was effectively whenever they were going to draw a cut-off, there was very little way of 1 year not impacting another year, ultimately, because of the nature of the fact you have your opening number becomes, obviously your closing number then becomes the opening number for next year. So effectively we have, and this is part of the reason why we got what we did with 22-3, is in any 1 year or in any cycle, to get a clean bill of health, you'd effectively need to do 2 audits. Because effectively you need to get assurance over all of those opening positions, then all the in-year positions, and then your closing position. Which is why I say MHCLG have put this in their sort of guidance, which Chris has attached further down the line, is actually rebuilding assurance, which is the phrase the government is using, will take place over a period of time. And I think that's why I think, because effectively what we've got from now till 28th of February to effectively get as much assurance as we can over 23-4. You know, in an ideal world, that would probably just about be enough time to do a normal audit, looking at the in-year transactions, looking at those closing balances. Effectively, you're then shoehorning another audit on top of that, and that's obviously, you know, incredibly time pressure both for us, the authority, and again, there's that question around, is that, as Chris has said, is that the best use of our time at this point in time? Clearly understand the broader narrative and those kind of things of where the authority is, but actually the view, I think, generally across the sector is let's move as far as we can in 23-4, and obviously we'll look to work with the authorities to do as much as we can. The greater chance is when we look at 24-5, so from the 28th of, after the, say, 1st of March 25, every local authority in the country will only then have one audit open. Effectively, then you've got the whole of that calendar year, or the whole of that year in terms of, because then that backstop for 24-5 is February 26. You've then got a whole year just to focus on one set of accounts. Up till now, we've had 2 or 3 on the go at the moment, and I think that's, I think everyone's hope that will give us a greater chance to bring that back to a normalised opinion. I think in terms of authorities that being backstopped just for 22-23, I say just lightly, there aren't many authorities that are being backstopped where it's just 1 year. I've got a number of authorities where we're effectively backstopping 4 years, and trying to bring that back up into balance in a 2 to 3 year period is obviously going to be incredibly challenging. So I guess it will be a challenge to do it, but I guess for somewhere like yourselves, there's more chance of us being able to do that than I guess is the case with a lot of those other authorities. And as Chris showed earlier, there are a lot of authorities who being backstopped just for 1 year is not the challenge. I say I've got 2 or 3 myself where we're 4 years behind. So we will do what we can. It's trying to work, I guess, over a 2 to 3 year period, when that's kind of what MHCAG have set out in their guidance as for all of us as firms to be working towards it. And I'm sure that all of the firms are going to be held accountable for making sure that they're doing best endeavours to doing this. So I don't think any firm is going to be able to sit and trot up in 3 years' time, 2 or 3 years' time, and say, oh, we've not been able to get any, some of those authorities back to recovery without there being challenging concerns for both sides, really. So I don't think, we will do what we can as a firm to move that forward, and we will, move as much as we can to bring these forward in that time frame. So I think we're all going to be held accountable for making that recovery a reality.
Thank you very much. A couple of sort of points in return, and then I'll bring Councillor Britcher and Councillor Davis in. Firstly, you're obviously prioritising work. I mean, that's what an accountancy company is going to do. You're going to have to prioritise. You've only got a certain amount of people, a certain amount of hours. You're going to have to prioritise different accounts. I would request that in that prioritisation, you could feed back to Grant Thornton that there are some particular characteristics of Thanet why I think we should be prioritised. And the 2 that spring to mind is we've had a number of serious governance issues in the last few years, meaning that perceptions of the council, rightly in some ways, is quite poor. And an impact like this may seem like it might not be value for money, but from my perspective, and I'll be interested in comments from the committee in a moment, could have a disproportionate impact. I am reminded, I've said this in the pre-briefing, the chairman's meeting before this, I remember when the European Union didn't get their accounts sorted, and it was an issue to do with countries wrangling between each other as to who got to do the audit, and some people not submitting, but their audits were not done. That became a political issue in the leaving of Britain of the EU, because people did not necessarily understand the context of why it was not audited. It just got thrown around as a political issue that must mean there's corruption because they haven't been audited. So I do think there is a value for money argument there. And secondly, for me, one thing I don't understand here is, this isn't a question of budget, is it? Like, we've had for 3 years, I imagine, our audit fee in our budget. And I would imagine there may be challenges because of COVID that means that maybe from our side there was delay. But this isn't a budget issue, and we knew this was coming. I don't see where like these huge gaps have come from our side in terms of our accounts being done. Yeah, sure. Do you want to come back on that, Matt?
I mean, I think in terms of the first point, obviously I would take that on board and we'll feed that in. I would flag the value for money work, which obviously sits alongside the accounts work, is up to date, and that obviously does, I guess, focus more on the governance and those kind of things. And as is in my letter at appendix 9, item 9, we have got that up to date, so that I guess we are providing assurance around that governance side of things. So we're not, we recognise that was one thing we had to be doing alongside the accounts. We've got to make sure we're dealing with that. So that is there. I think in terms of budget and that, the fees obviously increased significantly for 23-4. I guess that didn't necessarily drive the capacity. Ultimately it has been the capacity in the sector, and I think as Chris touched on earlier, that all of us are in a similar position in terms of scarcity of resource. I think the impact of COVID sort of pushed things to the right, and then things have sort of snowballed and those kind of things. So to put it down on one particular factor it's really difficult. It's a range of factors that have got to the place that meant that the overall sector has drifted to the right over the past 2 to 3 years, and ultimately the government have decided they need to draw the line at some point, because otherwise how do you stop pushing things to the right? Because I guess that's how we've dealt with in the past. If 21-2 was running late, we'd do that, and then that would impact on 22-3, and unless you do something to kind of draw a line, it's difficult to see how you brought that forward. Now, I guess there are various ways. You could have done it. You could have done abbreviated accounts or those kind of things. Obviously, the relevant stakeholders in the sector have decided this is the best way of dealing with that. I think, as I've said before, none of us want to be in this position. I've been doing this 15 years. I didn't come into local authority audit to be issuing disclaimer opinions because we couldn't deliver the work. That's, not why I'm here, not why any of us are here, really. So none of us want to be in this position. It's just viewed across the sector as the least bad situation, and the best. You have to draw a line to be able to allow us to move things forward.
Chris, do you want to come in, then I'll come to you, Councillor Pritchard and Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to try and avoid getting on my soapbox here to my best ability, but apologies if I climb up onto it. This is, again, no criticism directed towards you, Matt, at all. This is very much an English problem. If you look at the situation in Wales and Scotland, where they still have a national audit body, Audit Scotland and Audit Wales, they're not experiencing these delays. Accounts are being published on time and audits are being done on time. When the Audit Commission was abolished and it was put out to the private sector, fees were reduced significantly, and that was part of the remit to do it, that the private sector could do it more efficiently. I think the proof is now in the pudding that that's not been the case. Now we are actually seeing fees getting back up to above where they would have been with inflation increases in terms of where the Audit Committee were. The Audit Committee were far from perfect. There were lots of things that within the sector, local government were unhappy with. Perhaps it's be careful what you wish for and better the devil you know. I think in terms of fees themselves, I think this is perhaps some of it's been tongue-in-cheek, pointed at the auditors saying we're looking forward to our refund for the audits you're not doing, but that's a valid question I think for the committee to be asking in terms of what value are you getting from your auditors if they're not able to resource the work. Those are questions that I know Matt has already raised and are being raised by counterparts across the county. This isn't an easy thing to fix, but I remain hopeful and optimistic that we won't have a disclaimer 23-24. Matt Sanham, I know, has put a lot of additional resource into the team to make sure that we get our draft accounts published as soon as possible, and we look forward to working with GT colleagues in the new year to get that over the line before the backstop date.
Oh, thank you. Semi got two questions. The first one should be pretty quick. So obviously the delays, just as a clarification, is that almost entirely COVID, or is there other? I appreciate there was a lot of disruption there. And the second question really is about the chances of the 23-23 audit actually being at that. I know it wasn't the top level, but even the qualified opinion level, is that a realistic?
I think, as I said, COVID kind of pushed everything to the right, and then I think there's been challenges in terms of bringing those things back to recovery. The problem with it's one of those things, once you set something off, it's just a range of things within the sector. So ultimately, I guess in high level terms, COVID then pushed things to the right, that then delayed audits. What was then happening was where audits at other authorities which were on track, they were then notifying issues that then we then had to consider for open years. So it kind of became, the longer an audit went on, the more scope there was for it to continue to become a longer challenge, really. And I think that was probably the main reason why something had to happen, was ultimately all the time you keep saying, oh, well, you'll try and catch up, something else just comes in, and you look at that and try and deal with that. So I think that's, I guess, it's a combination of factors. I think in terms of 23-4, we will do what we can do. I think is committee. We've got team resourced from now effectively up to the end of February to work on the accounts. We will get through as much as we can do in that period. I guess we'll see where we get to on it. I think I have to be pragmatic in terms of the amount of work that would be needed to get to that stage, but we will do what we can do.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Matt. And again, nothing I'm about to say is personal, unless you take it that way. Councillor Bridges said, why the delay? What we have here is a localised issue because we're here to discuss TDC's business. But it seems to have been impacted by a national malaise by the sounds of it. And thank you for what you said, Chris, because party politics aside, the Audit Commission worked, the race to the bottom doesn't, and it's all about fee saving, I believe. And again, no disrespect to yourself, you have directors, I've worked with those people and I know how they think. And they have a duty to your shareholders as well. So, you know, everyone's doing their job, but unfortunately sometimes it clashes. However, what's the impact? We have, for example, we've never had a written response to two of us put an objection to an item in the accounts in 21. We have never had an outcome from that, despite repeated requests to Grant Thornton and to your predecessor in writing. We've asked this council, never had an outcome on that. How many instances, and that was a very valid objection, by the way. I'm aware that there was an individual who put about a dozen in at the same time. Quality of different objections, but no answers to it. Is this all getting washed away? Because if it is, then I think every single individual in this country, because the councils are who represent the community and the population, if we can draw a line and say, well, there's a backstop, we've got a backlog, you know, sorry, we only got 80% of your roof on, mate. You know, you might get a bit wet. Every individual in this country should be entitled to a backstop and a drawn 6 months ago on their tax bills and any other monies outstanding. Let's all have a fresh start and start again. This is farcical, absolutely farcical. And, you know, I'd like some assurance again on the fees. And again, not having to go at you personally, Matt, but your organisation is being paid handsomely to provide a service which you're sitting there and saying, well, we couldn't do it. Well, I'm sorry. I'd have been up in court. I'd have had the police on my door if I took a contract with someone when I was... Sorry, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you know, we would have, any of us would have the police on our door if we took money off of people and then didn't provide a service. So how the hell can an external auditor, because the problem seems to be external, I don't think we're getting the same problems in terms of feedback internally. And what I don't understand, this seems to have come up behind us very quickly, because in 2021, that sequence of events, and this place was a very interesting place at the time, and well done to all who have pulled so hard. However, to maintain that direction, we need to review the IMO's recommendations, not all of whom everyone's happy have been adequately met and things. And if the people that instructed those statutory recommendations aren't able to follow through and ensure their delivery, then what hope is there for any of us, and why are we paying for an incomplete service? You know, it just doesn't make any sense to me. And I think as an authority, and I'm pleased to hear the robust response that's been held here, but I think we need to apply some audit principles, some retrospective scrutiny, using whatever powers, and make sure that we're not paying for something just for it just to be written off. Plus the fact, and those concerns still continue over the financial matters that were objected to in 2021. So, you know, before lines are drawn, perhaps we could have some lines drawn and answers on the outstanding matters. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. And I think we can feel that there's quite a lot of anger around this situation. Lots of hard work has been done to pull the council out of difficult situations 2 or 3 years ago, and this has the feeling of potentially allowing us to be painted back into that corner. We're not going to solve this issue now. This is an issue that's out of our hands. Matt is here representing Grant Thornton. You know, he will only have a certain amount of resources. The thing that I would ask on behalf of the committee, and I think it appropriate if Chris was all right, if the two of us wrote, myself on behalf of the committee and yourself on behalf of the council, to Grant Thornton underlining this. But I think, from my perspective, I can understand one set of accounts potentially being impacted because of COVID and because of a national shortage, and understanding that. I do not understand at all why 2 years would be. And I think from our side, I understand from Chris and from Matt that we're going to do everything we can to give you, Grant Thornton, all the information that you need. And I think there are specific circumstances why we should be prioritised. And I think if Chris has agreed and the committee has agreed, I'll be writing to Grant Thornton. Hopefully you can pass it on to the relevant people to make sure that you and your team are allocated resources. Because I guarantee there will be some local councils who are your clients in the next 2 months will have their accounts done. And my question to you when you come back next time if ours aren't done is, Why were theirs done and ours not? And that will be the question. I don't necessarily need an answer now, but that's what the request would be. Are members happy that we note agenda item 7? We've minuted that myself and Chris will write to the auditors requesting that 23, 24 be prioritised. Are you happy with that? Are you happy, Chris, that
Absolutely,
we do
Chair.
that? Yep. Thank you. Matt, did you want to come in on anything, or?
I think in terms of just sort of the councillor's points, so the fees points clearly raised numerous occasions. The fees are completely outside of our control. The authority is within the public sector audit assurances framework. It opted into that. They appointed us as the auditor for that 5-year period up to 22-23. They are the governor of the fees, and in terms of those rebates, you know, completely understand as an authority why you'd want a refund for the work that we haven't done, as I'm not sitting there expecting us to keep that money. Ultimately, it's not for us to return it. We basically get the money from yourselves and pass it to PSAA, who then give us a rebate back in that terms of money. So ultimately, it will be for PSAA to refund the authority for that. Those 2 years worth of work, or the year of work we haven't done, completely entitled to that. Every authority I've been at is asking that question. So you should be banging PSAA's door on that. To me, they're not considering that as a big an issue. They should be. In terms of the objections and your comments on that, I will follow up on that. As far as I'm aware, we have shared with Chris our responses on those objections. Not for me to comment why you haven't seen those yet. They were obviously my predecessor dealt with those, but as far as I'm aware, they are all dealt with, and the authority should have responses to those. So I'm not sure why you've not seen those.
1 second, John. Chris, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, just to clarify, was your predecessor dealt with that, but it's not for me to respond to the objector. I appreciate that Sarah, who was Matt's predecessor, should have written to me, but it's Sarah's responsibility to inform the objector of the outcome of their work.
Which I believe we had done, but I will follow up on that.
Yeah, we could follow up on that. And then
Yeah, and in terms of Matt's rightly raised the role of public sector audit appointments, they're coming to a meeting of the Kent Finance Officer Group, which are my counterparts, I believe, early in the new year. But again, if you were in agreement, Chair, would there be some value in us producing a similar joint letter to send to the PSAA?
If I could, I was just, so you're saying you will include the PSAA in that, which was the point I wanted to come back in on. And also, whilst obviously we're talking about the situation as a whole, and I'm not trying to focus on an objection that I and another raised, I can assure the external auditor that neither of us have received a thing despite repeated requests for it, and we've got the documentary evidence of requesting those. And I think I've probably driven Chris mad at times saying to him, when are we going to hear? I think what we also need to be doing is reviewing the independent monitoring officer's recommendations and ensuring that there's nothing that's been missed there by either us or the auditor. Maybe I could recommend that.
Slightly separate issue, but I take the point. And Matt has sort of committed at Grant Thornton to taking away making sure that those objectors are written to. So that's agenda item 7, which we've had agreement on. Now, I'm just going to ask officers and Matt Dean from Grant Thornton. Agenda items 8 and 9 flow into that. We've almost taken them as 3, not to relitigate the debate we've just had. Are you happy that we note agenda item 8 and 9? Does anybody want to make any additional points? Matt, I know you've got some introductions prepared. Anything you want to add?
I was going to say, Matt sort of covered it off earlier. When between Chris and Matt, they've effectively covered off all the points. So the additional documents that were included, Chris has covered off as part of his intro, and as Matt alluded to, he's covered off those agenda items. What I was just going to come back on in relation to the previous point was in relation to Grant Thornton are currently working on value for money in terms of their review, and we've provided a response recently to where we are with all the IMO recommendation, the work that's been undertaken. So they are currently reviewing that as part of their audit for 23-24. So they'd already, so the value for money opinion that we've currently got covers up until 22-23. They're currently doing 23-24, and that's what Matt was alluding to earlier. They are doing, so in terms of providing assurance to this committee, they are doing the value for money review in tandem with the audits, which actually covers off some of the points that you raised, Chair. So I would just suggest that that's coming through at the moment.
Could I just thank Matt for that bit of feedback and the reassurance of that, because you know, these are serious matters, because we were teetering at one time, and those recommendations are vital.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Apologies to jump all over the agenda. In terms of the IMO recommendations, so we produced a report that went to the previous council, March 2023, before the most recent elections, to give an update of where we are. We are within a hair's breadth of finally closing off the last recommendation. There's a bit left to do around values, framework, those kind of things, but I would say the lion's share of it has been completed. Once we've got it all over the line, we're committed to bringing a report that will come back to full council to formally present the conclusion of the implementation of all those recommendations.
Thank you very much. Are members happy to note agenda item 8 and 9? No further comments. So I'm going to come to you, Matt, around agenda item 10. Is there anything additional that you want to add on this one?
I'm just reading my intro because I've got it twice according to this. So agenda item 10 was that the risk assessment, informing audit risk. Yeah, so effectively, I can cover it off. It's a quick intro. The purpose of the report is to contribute towards the effective two-way communication between Thanet District Council's external auditors and Thanet District Council's Audit Committee, as those charged with governance, which is obviously a topic that we've covered quite a bit tonight. The report covers some important areas of the audit risk assessment where we are required to make inquiries of Audit Committee under auditing standards. Obviously, Matt is here, but effectively they ask a whole series of questions that we have to provide responses to in order to provide this committee with the relevant assurance that they need. We've done that piece of work and it's attached. There's, everything's covered off as part of that report. So unless there's any specific questions, Chair.
Any comments from anybody? No.
Comment?
Yeah, sure.
I think there's certainly I've had an epiphany on certain things this evening. I think there's a burgeoning understanding, and I hope that people realise we are here for the best interests of this authority and its people. There are times where we're all abrasive. I make no apologies for that, but I think we have a synergy within the focus this evening, and I thank you for your feedback and comments all.
Thank you. Okay, members are happy to note the report. I don't know why I'm asking you. We're noting the report. And then finally, agenda item 11, independent auditors, Thanet District Council audit plan. Matt, do you want to introduce before we pass over to Matt Dean?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The external audit plan for 23-24 has been developed by our appointed external auditors, Grant Thornton, and sets out the proposed external audit work and fee relating to the 23-24 annual audit at Thanet. A representative from Grant Thornton, Matt, will present their interim audit findings report. No, they won't. Matt will present the timetable and the audit plan. It's being produced in consultation with myself and Chris, so over to Matt. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. So, yeah, this is, I guess, the plan for that 23-24 audit that we've touched on previously. I think it should look familiar to audit plans we've had in previous years. Appreciate some of you are new. So, page 77 of the pack, I guess, summarises the key elements of the work. So, on the left-hand side, we firstly have our significant risks, which are standard for an authority of your own in terms of management override control, the valuation of the council's assets, be it land and buildings, dwellings and investment properties, the valuation of the net pension liability and the risk of fraud related to expenditure recognition. So those are a very standard suite of risks, which you'll see at most of the districts across the county, certainly. Materiality there, when we prepared this, was based on the 21-22 figures, because those were the only ones we had available. Once the 23-24 drafts appear, we'll be able to revisit those and update those, but I wouldn't expect a significant movement from there. A little bit there around value for money, which Matt touched on earlier. Say we're up to date, we're working through 23-24 currently, and the logistics, again, as we touched on earlier, we're in currently working through what we can do, subject to the receipt of the accounts, and then we'll be working through up to the end of February to make sure we issue what we need to by the end of February 25, which is the backstop date for 23 for accounts. So that was all I was going to go through in terms of the plan. Happy to take any questions members may have.
Members, I think we've probably had a number of comments already on this, but does anybody have any additional they want to say? Okay, we are noting the audit plan. Can I thank everybody for their engagement tonight, and Matt Dean for coming along and hearing some robust responses from some of us, and also to officers for all the work that's gone into this. It's been a good evening. Thank you very much, and we'll see you in the new year. Thank you.